Hey guys, this is Alex Pierce from Lightsail VR. Today we're going to be looking at PCG, Procedural Content Generation. So I have a few different examples here I'll show you real quick. So we have on spline, which is like this, where it's following and spawning on top of a spline. We also have a landscape example. So this is the landscape. It's just a simple landscape with some holes in it, and I can do some procedural stuff on top of that. And I have another spline example where we're spawning on top or inside of a spline. So I can go from here and I can move this in and I can change the shape and it will spawn based on the shape of the spline on the inside. This is also another one that's just basically spawning on top of a plane. But yeah, that's basically what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at a very simplified version because a lot of the tutorials I've seen so far have like 40 nodes in their node graph, and it's quite honestly not really needed for most stuff. For example, this trees one could be 30 nodes, but all you really need are these 4 nodes. So I'm going to show you how to do PCG stuff very simply and hopefully get you off and running soon. So the first thing you have to do, of course, is go to Edit, Plugins, and search for Procedural Content Generation Framework. So enable those, restart your engine, you know the thing. So let's first look at how to do it for a landscape. So for a landscape, again, this is my amazing landscape material here, or object here. But to do this, all you have to do is create a graph and then drag that graph into the scene, like this, and then change the scale of it. So we're going to call this 1000 by 1000, and then it will generate whatever you need. So I'm going to show you how to create this this graph. In your content browser, right-click, and under PCG, you get this PCG graph, or you can also search for PCG. So right-click PCG, and you get this PCG graph. I'm going to name this, I'll call this PCG underscore tutorial landscape. And then if you open this, you get this input and this output. If you expand the input, you get this landscape here. Obviously, that's what we're going to be doing. If you do want to place this sort of on a plane or something else, you can just use the actor, but we're going to use the landscape. So I'm first going to just add the nodes we need. So right-click, we need a sampler, and there's a few different ones. We're going to do a surface sampler. We're going to add a transform points, and we're going to need, if you search static mesh, yeah, static mesh spawner. Okay, and those are really the main ones we need. So I'm going to go ahead and move this to back here, and I'm going to select all these and do Shift W to line them all up. We go landscape to surface, out to in, out to in, out to in. I don't think we actually need the output, but we're going to keep it there for now anyway. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select a static mesh, and we're going to talk about this node here. So in this node, you have your mesh entries, and this is where you're going to add your static meshes. So here I'm going to search for building, and I have a few different buildings already in this scene. I'm going to add another one, and I'll call this, or I'll do building 2, and I'll do one more. And the main thing really here is this weight. So right now, all the weight is set to 1. So if I open this up and close that, you see each one of these, they're set to 1. So what that means is if there are 3 buildings and they're spawned twice each, then there's going to be 2 buildings of building 1, 2 buildings of building 2, 2 buildings of building 3. But if we increase this number, let's say 10, and this one is 5, and this was 1, then there's going to be 10 times as many buildings of building 1 as there will be to building 3, and 5 times as many to building 3, etc. So this is very important, and if you're going to be changing this, you can't go into negative numbers. I can't make this, you can make it 0 actually, but you can't go to like -1 or whatever. So maybe you start, I don't know how high this number goes. Let's see. I think for me, I would start with, I think for me, if you're going to have a lot of these, like say you're going to have 50 of these, then maybe what you do is you set all of your weight to 50, so that way you can go down and up. So you can go, oh, okay, I want less of this building. And instead of increasing every single other one, you can just say 40. However you want to do this is fine. Right now, I'll just leave it at 1, and that'll be the default, and we'll see what that does. And let's go ahead and see if this works. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to drag it on. Remember, you just drag it onto your landscape mesh, and it looks like it's moving. So here, it doesn't matter how wide this is. If it goes over, it's just going to clip at the edge of your landscape. So if you're trying to fill your whole landscape, it doesn't really matter how big you go here. And you don't really want to change the scale here, because if you change the scale here for the height, it's going to do something weird. And you can change the height in the graph itself. So it's doing something, which is great, and it looks like it's extremely dense. So we're going to look at how to fix this next. Okay, so if we open up our landscape graph here, we can do a few things. So I want to teach you 2 shortcuts real quick. It's going to make our lives a little easier. So D for debug and E for, I forget what E is for, enable. So I can disable this mesh here. And sometimes you'll do something and it doesn't update. If that happens, you can just do this force regen. Anyway, sometimes doing the force regen, also moving around in the viewport seems to help as well. So you can turn off this static mesh spawner with E. And then what you can do is you can click on any of these other nodes and press D for debug. And D will show you what's happening. So these are the points that are being scattered, and this is how they look. So right now, they're really close together, especially with the size based on the size of our buildings. One of the ways that you can change the density, there's different ways of doing it, but one of the ways you can do that is going to the surface sampler node and changing the looseness. So if I change this to 2, you can see it's like that. If I go to 10, you can see now we're very loosely scattered across this plane here. So now if I go ahead and press E on this static mesh spawner, you can see that's a little better. So it was at 1, and if I change this to 5, or 10, or 50, you can see we can change the density here. Another thing you can see is this is kind of weird. And then if I let me change my looseness back to something higher, you can see in this area where there's like a little bump in this this landscape, which is going to be pretty likely that these buildings are sort of going off axis like this. So how do we fix that? Well, let's go ahead and disable that again, and we can see these a little bit easier here, and it's a little bit more performant. You can change that with the transform node. So I'm going to press D on surface sampler and D on transform points, and we're going to look at some things. So if I change this absolute rotation, if I turn this on, you can see these now stand up. I'm going to show you again here, and if we enable this, it might be even easier to see. So now, instead of turning, they're going to stand straight up and down, which is great. And then this is also where you can change your max resolution. So I'm actually going to go back here real quick. I'm going to change this to 10, so things are a little bit more loosely spaced out. But if we go to transform points, this is where you can change some things like min and max scale. So I might go 0.5 and to 2 on the scale. So that's gonna, what that's going to do is it's going to scale these buildings, you know, up to twice the height, and you know, down half. So if I come over here, let me just look over this way. If I reset this, you'll see that these buildings are all the same height, but I can change that quickly just by changing this right here. And you can do the same with this with rotation. Now, in the case of this city, maybe you don't want it to be rotated, but you could say that you want it to be rotated, not on that axis. Let's see. Nope. And let's see. There we go. Blender and Unreal, the different Z rotations is funny. So I'm going to go back over here to our surface sampler. I'm going to change this to 20, just so we can get a better sense of how these buildings are now sort of rotated in different ways. So if I go back and then just reset the rotation, you can see they're all facing the same direction, but you can change, you can change that here if you wanted to. So and then same with scale. As we already saw, you can scale that up or down, and you can also do absolute scale, absolute transform, offsets, etc. In any of these options, whether it's in surface sampler, transform points, or maybe not static mesh, but in a lot of these you can actually change the seed. So you can actually just go through here. Once you find a density that you like, you can just go through and change the seed until you get something that you like. And that's pretty much it for the landscape graph. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And one thing I'll mention is, let's say you wanted to add a few different versions of this, right? So let's say you have 3 different parts of the landscape that you want to change. If you want to keep all the settings exactly the same, you can just keep them all the same. But it is important to remember that whatever you change in here, it's going to change it for all of the actors that are in the scene. So what you might want to do, what you're probably better off doing, is duplicating this and calling it something else. Landscape 1 is fine for now. And then when you change the settings in this new one, I'll just do it here so we can see, they won't affect the other versions you have in the scene. So that's going to be the trickier part, especially like there's a project we're working on right now where we're probably going to have 50 or 100 different PCG graphs all doing similar things, but we're going to need them to be a little bit different. So you'll have to get organized in, especially we will have to get organized in how we label these and what we do with them, but just keep that all in mind. Okay, so now let's look at this other example which I have, which is just simply on a spline. So these are trees on a spline, and the spline is not a closed loop, so you could start and end wherever. And this is, again, can be really helpful for lots of different reasons. You can kind of get an idea already why it might be helpful, but now I can just click on this spline and I can drag it over, and I can quickly change, how these trees are routed through the city or whatever I want to do. And not only that, but we can change which types of trees, we can change the scale, etc. So I'm just going to jump in and show you what I have here for these trees. So let me open this up. It looks very similar here. The difference between this one is it's attached to a blueprint, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So you're getting the spline data from the blueprint, and you're doing a spline sampler instead. And the big differences in this example are, in the spline sampler, you can choose to do on spline or on interior. These are kind of the main two I think that you would want to use. So on spline and on interior. And then if it's on the spline, you can change it to be subdivision, or you can choose distance. It probably depends on what you want to do, how your spine is laid out, etc. But this distance factor, this distance increment, is how you change sort of the density of the, if it's on a spline, this is sort of how you change the density of that. So that's sort of the unique thing about this one. So let's go ahead and set this up. So to do this, the first thing you're going to need to do is actually create a blueprint. And I'm going to double click into this blueprint so you can see it. So basically, we've just added a spline, we've added a PCG component, and then in that PCG component, we've added a graph. So it's pretty simple. We're good. Let's go ahead and build it from scratch. So right-click, blueprint class, actor. We'll call this BP underscore spline underscore tutorial. And I'm going to double-click this and go to components, add, type in spline, add a spline. On this spline component, this is where you can choose if you want it to be a closed loop or not. So what this means is, in my other example here, this is a closed loop. No matter what I do, even if I just start it, if I have 2 points or more, it's always going to be closed. So if you're going to do anything on the interior, if you're going to do a spline like this and say fill the interior, then I can't really see a reason why you wouldn't want to use this closed loop option. So just know that this where you select that is in the blueprint under the spline component. Now let's go ahead and add one more component, PCG, and we're going to add under the PCG, the main thing to know is you need to enter a graph here. So I'm going to make a new graph, and I'll call this PCG graph. We'll call this PCG underscore spline underscore tutorial, just so I'm not confused. With it selected, I could just choose to use selected asset from browser, or of course you can just search for it in here. But either way, I have it there, and now that's all you really need to do from the blueprint. So I'm going to go ahead and compile, and yeah, I'm just close that for now. And now in our graph, we are going to add spline, get spline data, spline sampler, goes into here, and same thing, transform points, and static mesh. Select them all, Shift W to align to the top, and this is essentially all we need to do. So one thing I like to do is add comments. So if you click on this, this is where, again, we can change the spline to be on interior, on spline. We can change the subdivision mode. So I can, especially when you're first getting started out with this, if you press C, select this, press C, you can say here, change to on interior or on spline. And that'll make your life a little bit easier later when you're trying to figure out where you change things. Same thing with transform. So this one, the main thing I would change for these, at least right now, would be scale and rotation. Space these out a little bit. And then static mosh spawner is pretty obvious what you're going to be doing in there, so I don't necessarily need to put something in there. This isn't as helpful when you only have 5 nodes, but when you have 50, this is going to be important. So anyway, now we have these. Let's go ahead and see what happens. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to, I think I'm just going to minimize it here. I'm just going to make it smaller, not minimize, just make it smaller. And where is this graph? And then here's my new spline. So if I drag this blueprint into my scene, right now I don't have anything. If I click on this, if I double click, should be able to drag out my spline here. And then I can hold down Alt, drag out another point, hold down Alt, drag out another point. So let's go ahead and add a static mesh. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to go to mesh entries. I'm going to add a, I don't have any great trees in this project, but I'm going to add one anyway. One of these trees here. There we go. So now we have lots of trees. Great. So if you go to the spline sampler node, go back up to the top, this again is where you can change the distance increment. And I get that by having the dimension on spline mode distance. You can also do subdivision. It does a similar thing, but I think distance probably makes more sense for me. My guess is that if I had a bunch of points right next to each other, in fact, let's see if we can do this. If I just add a few real close to each other, let's see what subdivision versus distance does. Because my thinking is subdivision will just divide evenly during the points, whereas distance will just go the full distance of the thing. So let's just check it out. So go back to my graph. If I change this to subdivisions, yeah. So this is exactly what it does. So subdivisions will subdivide between the points, whereas distance will go the full distance of basically the distance between all the different points. So again, use case, it's up to you kind of what's going to make sense, but I think for me, I mostly be using this distance. So I can change how close they are by changing the distance increment, And just like in the other example, I can change the scale to be, let's say, 2 and 0.5. I find that those are pretty good numbers. Even in other programs that I've used, I've just found that like going too far below or above that generally is not good. Now for these trees, I probably want them to be even closer. So maybe I'll just do 1.25 and 0.75, 25, 25. Yeah, good enough for government work. So that'll be good. So now, again, I can hold down Alt and just drag out a new point. And I can also, another thing you can do is if you select all of these, so if I right click on any one of these points, I can delete, I can duplicate, I can do select all. And the other thing I can do is I can change these all to linear if I want it to be a box. So we'll just keep it like that for now. And then if you want this to be a closed loop, then again, what you could do is you could go to the blueprint and then select spline and then search for, you can either search for it, so we can search for closed and select it. And you can see exactly what that does. Is it just, it puts wherever the last point is, it'll connect the dots between the first point and the last point. So again, whether you want that on or off is up to you. I'm going to turn it on because now I want to show you how you can change the this to be instead of being on the spline, you can change this to be on interior, and now we have trees inside. And just like we did earlier, what we can do is now we can change the so instead of looseness like we had in the mesh or the mesh sampler, what we can do is we can change the interior sample spacing. So lower is a higher number, and higher is more spread out. And now, just as the same as we were earlier, we can continue to change these, and it'll automatically generate based on where that is. So you can see why you might need lots of variations of these blueprints and these graphs, because you probably will want to tweak them quite differently depending on what you're trying to do. If you're creating a city, then you're probably going to need, you could do it all in one very complex procedural generated graph, but you could also do it using a combination of them. So before I end this tutorial, the other thing I might do is under my comment section here, because again, now to change the density, what we're trying to change is this interior sample spacing, and it's a little bit confusing. So I might double click on this comment and do say interior slash spline, and then shift enter and do density dash interior sample spacing. Interior sample spacing. That'll just help me know, how to change the density. So once you've created these blueprints and these graphs, you can just duplicate them. So for instance, let's say I wanted to do something similar, but I wanted to be able to change it from closed loop to an open loop, etc. So I can just duplicate these blueprints. If I right click, duplicate, tutorial 1 is fine, right click, 2 in tutorial, right click, duplicate, tutorial 1, and I think it probably is good that they would have the same exact name. So if it's going to be tutorial 1, that's fine. And then in the blueprint, all you would need to change is under the PCG component, scroll down to the graph and then change this to tutorial 1 and compile and save. And now those two will be more or less linked together. So I could bring in a new blueprint and double click this and move this out and alt drag and alt drag. And now I have two very similar groves here, but I can change them separately. Let's change the density. And now this density does not affect this density. like a lot of things in Unreal, a lot's going to come down to being organized, really, because you can see how if you just name them like I have, it's going to be difficult to tell what is what. Which one of these am I looking at here? So you probably want to rename these to make a little bit more sense. But yeah, I think that is the basics of PCG in a more simplified way than some of the other tutorials. So hopefully this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.